So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar with Marlene Belfort. I'm Susan Baserga, I'm a professor of molecular biophysics and biochemistry at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. I'm an RNA biologist, and I'm thrilled to introduce my colleague Marlene Belfort today to talk about her new book, which is entitled "Mommy, Can Boys Also Be Doctors? A Message to Young Scientists and Other Humans." And I'm going to try to hold it up. I'm not sure you'll be able to see it, but here we go. Marlene, can you see it?
No.
Oh, okay.
Let's see if I hold it up.
Well, I think we're all stuck in the same. Yeah, I can see yours. Perfect. So this is the book. And just so you all know, I've put, she's offered a 25% discount for the week of June 23rd to the 27th. I put that in the webinar chat if you would like to access that afterwards. And if you're having trouble with the discount, Marlene says just to email her, or you can email me. So let me introduce Marlene for a minute with a little bit of a long and illustrious introduction before we get to the nitty-gritty of the book. So Marlene Belfort, PhD, is a distinguished professor of biological sciences and biomedical sciences at the University of Albany. SUNY, a trailblazer in the field of RNA biology, Dr. Belfort is widely recognized for her seminal work on mobile genetic elements, particularly group 1 introns and inteins. Her research has transformed our understanding of RNA splicing mechanisms, genome plasticity, and protein splicing, with broad implications for molecular evolution and biotechnology. Dr. Belfort is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Her contributions have been recognized by numerous honors, including the NIH Merit Award, the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Scholarship, and election as a AAAS Fellow. She has played a pivotal role in science policy and mentoring, serving on advisory panels for the NIH, the DOE, and the National Science Foundation, and has been a strong advocate for equity and inclusion in science. Through her leadership and mentorship, Dr. Belfort continues to shape the future of molecular biology and foster a diverse scientific community. Marlene received the 2022 ASBMB Mid-Career Leadership Award from the American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, that's us. This honor was presented by the ASBMB Women in Biochemistry Molecular Biology Committee, which is the committee that I chair. It recognizes individuals who demonstrate a strong commitment to advancing the careers of women in biochemistry and molecular biology alongside excellence in research, discovery, and service. Dr. Belfort delivered her award lecture at the 2022 ASBMB annual meeting, where she shared insights from her research and her journey in balancing a successful scientific career with personal commitments. So today I'd like to welcome Marlene to our webinar to discuss her new book. The format's going to be, we're going to do some questions between me and her till about 20 of, and then we'd like to open it up to all of you to ask questions. So please put those in the Q&A, and I'll access the Q&A and start reading your questions to her for the last 20 minutes. So welcome, Marlene.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And thanks for the Women's Committee of ASBMB for all the good work you do.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and I'm really looking forward to this. I think we're going to have a great time. So, first question: what inspired you to write this book?
So I'd say about 25 years ago, when my children had left home and I had time to think again, I figured I had learned some lessons that would be useful to share. But I didn't have time to really focus on a book until after I closed my lab, which was a couple of years ago. And so that was when I started writing seriously.
And so there wasn't really a specific moment or experience, or did you always think you were going to write what is essentially a memoir of a woman's life in science, starting from when you were a child, you're going up to what you call your fourth quarter?
Yes. So, again, about 25 years ago, the ASM gave me some award that necessitated me writing about my personal life. And at that point, it occurred to me that the mentoring role in science and the parenting role in my domestic life really complemented each other. And I started to realize that I was a better scientist because I was a fulfilled mom, and I was a better mom because I was a distracted scientist. And so I wrote an article or two um, for ASM News, and I think one was in Current Biology on this topic of the mutually reinforcing roles of parenthood and being a scientist. And I think from that moment on, I thought, yeah, when I get time, I need to write about this.
So I'm really happy that you did, because I loved reading the book. Tell us about where the name comes from, because that's a really unique, it has a unique name. It's not exactly what you'd think about you'd be looking for if you were looking for a memoir. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of female scientists and physicians in the family. My three daughters-in-law are all medical doctors, and they were huddled in a group talking at some family event, and one of my grandchildren saw them and asked the question, Mommy, can boys also be doctors, right? Because here were all these female physicians. And at the time that he said that, it was like, bing, that's going to be the name of my book.
I love it. I think it's great. So let's
And
turn.
of course, when I was growing up, all the doctors were guys.
Right, so that's what I wanted to switch to. Let's talk about your childhood in South Africa, because most of us have not been to South Africa, and it was unique from several perspectives. I could enumerate what they are, but I'm going to let you tell us about tell us about your childhood, because it's really unique, and it helps to make you who you are.
Yeah. So, my parents immigrated from Nazi Germany in the late 1930s to Cape Town. So I was raised by an immigrant family with really very little money, because one needed like $100, which was a huge amount in those days, to come into the country, and then that $100 was recycled to other family members. So my mom was a seamstress, and from the money she earned, my father um, bought some socks from a wholesaler. So this classical rag trade story of Jewish immigrants, both in South Africa and this country. So I was raised in that. And then tragically, my father killed himself when I was a teenager. And it was almost a year before we found him. And so, of course, that was very traumatic and influential in my becoming who I am. And then just finally, Cape Town is just a magnificent city. It's so rich in agriculture, in beauty. It has two oceans coming together at the tip of Africa. And I was always entranced by the nature of the place. And I think that influenced my wanting to be a scientist.
That's really cool. And what were your opportunities for going to university? Was that something that was kind of normal for you, or were you outstanding in in deciding to go to college?
No, so the way things worked then is that there were academic streams, right? So there was an A stream and a B stream and a C stream, and the A stream typically went on to college, and then the B stream. So I went to an all-girls school. The B stream was accounting, and the C stream was called domestic science, which is home economics, right? So I was in the A stream. So I think I was predetermined to go to college. But because I went to an all-girls school, my training in science was lacking. So we learned language, Latin, 5 years of Latin, but no calculus, very little chemistry, no physics. And when I figured that I wanted a career in science, I had to get some sort of remedial attention. And so my mother hired a tutor, and that's George Belfort, whom I married some years later. So, yeah, and
Great,
that's what
great
prepared
story.
me for my scientific career.
Love that story. It's got to be told. I just love that story. So after South Africa, you were trying to figure out if you wanted to go ahead with further training in biochemistry, molecular biology. Tell us about your, because this is my other favorite part. Tell us about
When
uh,
I was a chambermaid.
well, that and the technician in Israel, right? Those are all those things that kind of contributed to you choosing academics, but applying to graduate school. Because I was telling this story to someone else, and it really resonates with people. So tell us your graduate school story.
Yeah, so by the way, I have to tell the chambermaid story because
You go
many
ahead.
people will freak out when their children become chambermaids or ski bums. So when one of my sons became a ski bum, I took it in stride. So the chambermaid, I was just treated with such indignity. I decided I needed to do something useful with my life. And so did apply to graduate school. I applied to the University of California at Irvine. I was in the process of getting married, and my husband was going to graduate school there, so that was the only show in town. And I had never taken a standardized test before, so my test scores were abysmal. Um, and of course, I was rejected from graduate school. But my husband said, go in, talk to the chair of admissions. Maybe something will open up for you. And the chair of admissions was Lee Hartwell, who was a young assistant professor at the time. So most of you know that Lee went on to win a Nobel Prize years later. But Lee, when I walked in, said, "Oh, you speak English. You're from Africa." And I said, "Yes, I speak English." And he realized that I was fairly fluent. And he said, "But, it was a unanimous rejection. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do for you." But we went on talking. It was a lovely conversation. And I think he realized that I'm fairly intelligent. And besides these B grades, which are really excellent in the British system, or at least they were in those days, that I was reasonably capable. But he said, apply for a master's. And so I went back and I was downhearted. And then a few weeks later, I got a call from Lee saying that at the last minute, one of their acceptances had turned them down, and they were willing to allow me to be a graduate student on a trial basis, and so I got into the graduate program. And it turns out that probably 30 years after that fact, when Lee had moved to Seattle, he was at the Hutch. He invited me to be on his advisory board. I think I think that was his way of telling me that he didn't regret admitting me into it.
Yep, I think that's a real highlight of resilience. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So, getting onto your career, you having read the book, you view your career as having had several bumps instead of a straight line, which I think is also an important lesson for people. So people always kind of think about, oh, well, my career should just be this way, and it really, most careers go like this, right? They're more zigs and zags. So share with us how you navigated through all the different kinds of bumps.
Yeah, yeah. So of course the first zag was being rejected to graduate school. But then I got in and did the best work I could. So I think if there is a key to all the zags, it's just doing the best work you can. And there have been others. I have had some problems with illness. I've had some problems with discrimination. And yeah, so somehow just continuing to keep nose to the grindstone and doing the best work allows one to come out the other end with some degree of success. But you're making a good point. I think when we see people who've achieved some degree of success, one's impression is that it was a smooth path, but that's not the case at all. And so there's a message in there for young people to not be discouraged when things don't go the way they hoped they would. They need to stick with it, and they will persevere.
Figure out a way to,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's excellent advice. So, along those same lines, mentoring others has been really important for you, and you alluded to the similarities between mentoring and raising a child, and that gives me a little pause because I have a 28-year-old, but I wonder what he would say. The um tell us about your mentors and how they inspired you and how you've carried that forward.
Yeah. So I have had a few very influential teachers. I had a professor of biochemistry when I was at the student at the University of Cape Town who really helped me ask the right questions, spoke to me about evolution, which always fascinated me. And then into graduate school, um, I had actually very few female role models all the way along. I had a very, very hard time identifying women who were successful in science, let alone successful in combining family with science. And I knew all along that I wanted to be a mom. I needed to be a mom. And yeah, so that was hard. But there were two women who were particularly influential in mentoring me and promoting my career. One was a colleague, Lorraine Flaherty, when I was at Wadsworth, where I had a hard time and was almost fired. And she was a lab chief at the time and took me under her wing and said, you know, this will be a safe space for you. Just do the best work you can, work on whatever you like. I'll take care of you. And she did. And then the other person who was extremely influential is Joan Stites, who not only sent me Yale-trained PhD students who became postdocs in my lab, but she advocated on my behalf. Um, and so I really owe a debt of gratitude to Joan. She's a terrific scientist and a wonderful human. And then we had different models for when we had our children, but we reconciled those differences. And yeah, today we're happy grandmothers.
Yeah, so this is something that you and I agree completely on because Joan was my postdoc mentor and as
I,
you know continues to be my mentor and friend all these years later, like 40 years later. So she's made a difference in a lot of people's lives. But tell us, Marlene, something about the people you've mentored and what it's meant to you to mentor them and how you think about mentoring.
yeah, so I really enjoy um, mentoring, nurturing, and that's everything from um, undergraduate students through graduate students through junior faculty. Um, I think people need lots of different mentors. I had different ones, and I'm honored to be the mentor of these people um, who benefit from being with me.
That's fabulous. That's just great. So um getting to your family life. It's you alluded to how important it was for you to have children. It's clearly been a major joy in your life, which is fabulous. So and you're the one who taught me this when we gave you the award. So I'm going to use your words here. Please share with us about your thoughts on work-life integration. So this is different. This is what Marlene taught me, the difference between work-life balance and work-life integration. So tell us what that is, and then tell us about how you managed it.
Yeah. So I think work-life balance has become cliche, right? But but I like both work-life integration and work-life balance. I like balance because I think being intensely involved in different activities kind of is stabilizing. So that has that sense of balance. I know if I had been exclusively a scientist, I would have gone nuts. And if I had been exclusively a mom, I would have gone nuts. And then being the two provided that balance. So I like work-life balance. And I like work-life integration too, because the two are so integrated. So not only does one learn from one activity how to navigate the other, um, but also one activity provides relief from the other. So I was often asked, how do you deal with these three rowdy boys? And I said, oh, I go to work. And that's the truth. You know, I went to work and yeah, so I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. So the way I remember you explaining it to me is that balance was when you when you have when they're separated, and then integration is when they're kind of all one thing. And I thought back on my life and realized that I've been integrated all the time. It's a really powerful thing to think about for yourselves, to all the folks who are here. So to tack
And just if there are young folks who are feeling massively guilty because they feel they are not good enough parents because they spend too much doing science, and then they're not good enough scientists because they spend too much time parenting. Um, what I realized afterwards is that, that kind of neglect that is perceived is not real neglect. It's just demanding of those children to be more independent humans and for them to be interdependent in a way that they take care of each other. And so what was so guilt-inducing for me turned out to be the best thing I could have possibly done for my children, right? I think I would have made them crazy had I spent a lot of time, demanding that they be these perfect boys.
I just totally agree. I think you nailed it. I think that's a great outlook. So switching to something a little less cheery, you have had major challenges with your mental health in a couple of instances, and you write about it very frankly in the book, which I think is very courageous and very important for lots of folks similarly struggling. Share with us how you cope. Share with us what happened, and then share with us how you coped.
Yeah, so I've had two major depressive episodes, both of which lasted several years. They were late onset. My first one was in my mid-50s, and the second one was in my early 70s. I was hospitalized for both. I received shock therapy, also called ECT, for both, and that helped get me out of it and on the road back to recovery. And I realized that talking about it did two things. One is there's a lot of shame associated with mental illness. And so talking about that shame helps one get rid of it. And right, my father killed himself. I didn't even know as a child that he was suffering from depression. So I think I needed to express myself to counter what he had done, but also to help people around. And it's amazing how common mental health issues are in almost every family. Um, and just one other thing is Christine Guthrie, another RNA scientist and of course mutual friend, suffered from some debilitating depression, and she was very open about it. And I admired that in Christine, and that was so helpful to me. And so I wanted to be helpful to other people.
It's such an excellent point how we really stand on each other's shoulders, right? So we really, kind of band together and help each other. I just think that's great. So in your book, you talk about your fourth quarter of life. And I'd never heard that expression before. So tell us what that is and tell us what your plans are, because I'm sure they're fabulous.
So I think I defined it as years after 70 or years after 75, or maybe between 75 and 100 is the fourth quarter. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I closed my lab about 2 years ago, but I still actively work for the university. But I also have time to do other things now. And of course, the first thing I did was write the book, but I'm also very active, just being with my children, going to visit them, having them over, being with my grandkids. And then I'm also active on a local social justice committee. And the two areas that I work on most actively is striving for peace in the Middle East, and also I'm involved with a local mental health organization.
So
So
go
it's
ahead.
very nice to have the space to actually do productive work in other areas now.
I think that's great. So what kind of things do you still do for the university? You said you were still doing stuff. So are you teaching?
Yes. So yes, I do teach a course, and then I'm active in various DEI organizations. So not only Women in Science and Health, WISH group, which promotes the careers of women, but I also work quite actively in the space of training students and postdocs of color to be faculty members in academia, and hopefully the outstanding ones, grooming them so that after they do their postdoctoral work at some terrific place, they'll come back and become faculty at the university. Something like between 40 and 45% of our undergraduate students are students of color, and most of the faculty are white men. And so I'm trying to work to improve that ratio in the future.
That's fabulous. So, but tell us a little bit more about WISH, the Women in Science, because you were before we started, you were telling me some stories, because other people might want to start an organization like this where they are. So how did you come to do, what is it? How did you come to do it? And what have you done that you
Yeah.
think
So I actually about 15 years ago moved from Wadsworth Center. I moved my lab to the University at Albany, and at Wadsworth we had a very close-knit group of women. They were called WOW, Women of Wadsworth. They still called WOW. We still meet. Um, and then when I arrived at the university, there was sort of an absence of women supporting each other. And I've had women supporting me for all of my life. My mother and grandmother and the maid, Bessie, raised me. And then I went to an all-women's school and so on. So I went to the dean, Elga Wolfert, who had hired me, and she and I started WISH. And we've had really probably around 13 or 14 years now of very active interaction. We also got an NSF-funded grant to support our activities. Of course, that was taken away in the current administration. It was an advanced grant to promote women's careers in science. But at the very beginning of WISH, we started out by each woman just giving some sort of summary of both their science and their backgrounds. And we had a mathematician and an atmospheric scientist start a collaboration as a result of that, where the atmospheric scientist was working on tropical cyclones and the mathematician was modeling circles and shapes. And so, yeah, so they published together. And so I think that these sorts of support groups are really very, very valuable. We also have students and postdocs participate in some of the WISH activities, and they've started their own group. So we have a student group called STEM Now, which is a group for nourishing each other's science and each other's psyche as well. So
But
I,
one of the things I really love about your stories about Wish are that this collaboration came out of this community that you're bringing together, and that it's not just people sitting around complaining, which I can do as well as anybody can, right? But I love the idea that you're bringing people together, and stuff is happening because of it. I just think that that's really great.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes we piss and moan and complain, but most often it lands in some productive, constructive action. And yeah.
So I have a couple of things I thought I would read in the chat, and then I'm going to turn to the questions in the Q&A. So if you all, I'm monitoring both things, which I can barely do. So if you want to put your questions in the Q&A, that's great. If you want to write them in the chat, I'll also take a look at that. But I just wanted to read, you have a couple testimonials here in the chat from Asmir Alieva. I just want to say how wonderful it is to know Dr. Belfort, having the opportunity to learn from her and to turn to her for advice and guidance has been one of the most meaningful parts of my academic journey. So. And then we have another one from Ella Osman. Attending this webinar came at the perfect time for me. Thank you, Dr. Belfort, for sharing your story and experience. And then Michelle Ehrman, who must be a colleague of yours. Great to hear a STEM Now shout out. Thanks so much for the support from Wish. And we're having, let me now look at the Q&A for, and please put your questions that you would like. Okay, so let me read these to you. This is from Ala Osman. I've always thought that science and, on the other hand, motherhood and family were two separate paths. But seeing those who manage to excel in both, shining in their careers while raising families, truly inspires me. From your experience, what do you think is the key to successfully integrating these two paths without one negatively affecting the other?
I think it requires a lot of sacrifice. So for 20 years, the focus was on two aspects of life, family and science. So very limited social life, very limited cultural life. Focus. So one needs to be prepared to do that. I think that's key. And then doing both to the best of one's ability, just working hard, persistently, and not losing focus.
So Carlette Para, who will be our next chair of Women in Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at the ASBMB, she writes, what is your message to the many students who fear their future in science careers today, given the state of affairs in the academic world? They are encountering rejection, deportation, discrimination, and research funding threats.
Yes. So these are extremely difficult times. It is very discouraging for young people in science, but they need to persist. We're putting our money on you to persist, to stick with it, to do the best you can, and you will come out the other end. This current situation cannot last forever. This country is better than that.
Great. Anonymous attendee writes, when depression struck for you, did it negatively affect your ability to carry out work or productivity, in other words, your executive function, or affect your perception of yourself? what advice would you give to younger PIs suffering from bouts of depression? And they write, I found that it's not a topic to consult the chair about.
Yeah. So by all means, you can send me an email and I will answer your question in great depth. But I will say, yes, it changed the perception of myself. I was totally psychotic for some weeks before I got treated. My advice is to get the best treatment you possibly can. I think it's critical. As I said, for the best treatment, I needed to be hospitalized twice. And in both cases, I was extremely well taken care of. And my pathway to recovery started with those hospitalizations. And trust me, there are more scientists than you can imagine out there who've been through hard times. I know a close colleague of mine who is now retired also went through a lengthy hospitalization, came out, stuck with it, and was eventually elected to the National Academy of Sciences. So yeah, it's incredibly discouraging to be depressed. And yes, it does interfere with one's work, but one can come out the other end and prevail.
I think that's great advice to get the best help you can. I think that's great. So Esther Bresselman writes she wants to share with us an anecdote. And she says, I have more of an anecdote than a question that happened not so long ago. My then 4-year-old, now 6-year-old daughter and I had a conversation soon after I had started my lab, and the topic of scientists came up. When I said, you know, your mom is a scientist, she said, Mom, that's wrong. You are a mom. Scientists are old guys with gray hair. And that must have come from cartoons depicting Einstein. Of course, after she spent a lot of time in my office and in my female colleagues' offices, I think she means to say that, you know, she changed her point of view. I think this perception of what a scientist looks like, unfortunately, happens surprisingly early. What would you say are ways to change that?
Well, I think to some extent we've already changed it, right? The title of my book is Mommy, Can Boys Also Be Doctors? So I think by going out and doing it and by immersing children with colleagues who are women, that changes the perception. I I just look over my lifespan, the perception of women's roles. I remember when my children were grade school kids, all our male neighbors were physicians, and all the moms were stay-at-home moms. And now, when I look at these same children, if they are young women, they are the scientists and the physicians, and the guys are all married to scientists and physicians. So I think the perception is definitely changing, and the reality is changing. So the reality will change the perception.
I used to have a T-shirt that I used to wear that said, "This is what a scientist looks like."
Yes. And also, you know, there are these onesies you can buy that say, forget, you know, pink, forget princess. I want to be a scientist.
How to start the programming early. So here's another one from Reza Songwa Chinda. Hi, Dr. Belfort. Thank you for sharing your brilliant story. It is very inspiring. As a woman in research cellular molecular biology in the US who originates from Africa as well, I would like to know if you have any tips in facing our fears of doing great in a very diversified world and how to avoid having a mental breakdown in the journey of juggling both family life and science. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I want to emphasize that I don't think my mental breakdown was from being a mom and a scientist. My two mental breakdowns were very specifically related to some physical conditions that I was suffering. And I want to make that point clear. I think that having feelings of nourishing at the same time, nourishing being parenting, at the same time that one is engaged in this very intense academic exercise, um, they actually create a fabric that leads to resilience rather than breaking down or becoming depressed. So I would not fear the two activities as long as you're firmly committed to them both. By the way, I need to say that I've had extraordinary help along the way by the same guy who was my tutor, who became my husband and the father of my children. He is also an academic and also intensely involved in his work, but has taken a lot of the responsibility for raising a wholesome family.
I think that's an important point that you had a partner, you had a
Yes, so one needs to surround oneself with people who can support one, right? So we didn't have family because we were 10,000 miles away from them, but we had each other. We had neighbors, friends. Whenever I had some money to spare, I would hire people to help us. And so finding support is really key.
So, coming to the next question from Ella Osman, the mental health organization that you are affiliated with, would you share the name of that? Would that be helpful to people, or is that just local?
Well, I can share the name, but it's local. It's called the Picasset Mental Health Center. But I'm also the faculty advisor for NAMI, which is, I think, maybe National Association for Mental Illness.
Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah, and there is a NAMI chapter on our campus, and there are NAMI chapters throughout the country.
Yeah, I think NAMI's a good, I think they do good work, and I think that's a good tip for folks. And the second part of the question was, do you have any advice on how to prevent mental health from deteriorating and how to manage it before it reaches an extreme point? But I
Yeah,
think you kind of answered that already by talking about getting help.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, so getting the best help you possibly can from support groups, from counselors, from psychiatrists. Yes.
And we have an anonymous question. Socially, culturally, and sometimes even economically, women are expected to compromise on their careers for the sake of family. For example, moving geographically, taking on lesser work, putting certain goals on hold, more than men are. Sometimes that makes practical sense as well. How do you make a distinction between making a rational, practical choice versus yielding to social cultural conditioning? It's a
And
really profound question, I think.
it is a profound question. And my answer is that I'm always driven by passion. Um, so passion, as I said, I came into this knowing I wanted to be a mom. And then I wanted to be a scientist. Those were my primary passions. They are what drove me. And so I hesitate giving advice, but finding one's passion is important in driving one forward in a very productive way.
And then someone comments that people should recommend people looking into the QPR training, which is suicide prevention training. Then there's some really great national organizations that do that. So that's all I have in the Q&A. I'm gonna take a look at the chat and see if there's anything going on in there. Let's see. See where are we here? Um uh uh okay, mostly they're just thank yous to you, Marlene. So good. You should feel good about. Here's a question. So this is a good question. I'm curious if Dr. Belfort may have ever come close to quitting science or doubting her ability to do science.
I I don't think I've ever come close to quitting. I sometimes doubted my ability to do it as well as I wanted to do it. Uh, but I hung in there and did my best, and it turned out to be good enough. I think good enough is also an important lesson. There are times when one has less energy to give to a particular activity than would be optimal. And one needs to be able to say, for now, this is the best I can do. It's good enough. I will come back. I'm still learning good enough, right? It's still needing to be kind of perfect and and right up there, but try it.
Someone says, would it be possible to contact Dr. Belfort via email? If so, may I kindly request their email address? I don't know how to, I can't.
You can look it up
Yeah,
online.
they're
It's
easy to find. She welcomes that. And so Marlene, getting back to the idea of being good enough, which is so I think that we're coming to the end, and I think I've got all the questions and the chat covered. There's a lot of very sweet thank yous in the chat, but I thought we'd just talk for a minute, getting back to your life lessons, getting back to your book, because one of your life lessons is none of us is perfect, but most of us are good enough. I think that's important for all of us who are striving to succeed in this field. But I wanted to talk about a couple others because a couple others resonate to me, and then we're going to close on this note. I love this one. It's good to walk toward those who can help us and who love us, and to have the courage to walk away from those who don't. Where does that come from?
So it comes from Amna Nawaz. Amna Nawaz is a news journalist. She does the news hour most evenings, and she's a very, very impressive, feelingful, smart young woman. And that was from a graduation address that she gave, maybe at Princeton. I'm not exactly sure where, a couple of years ago. And yeah, so there have been a few circumstances in which I was not able um, to withstand what I interpret as discrimination. And I tried very hard the harder I tried, the worse it became. And then eventually I needed to walk away. And walking away is a very scary activity. But in all cases that I've needed to do that, it's just opened new opportunities. And I really like that quote for that reason.
Yeah, me too. I ever since I read your book about a month ago, I keep thinking about that. I think it's very powerful and something I certainly never thought about. So I think we're getting to the end of our hour. I've just you have many kudos in the webinar chat. There's too many for me to read. I've just reposted the 25% ASBMB discount for the week of June 23rd to 27th for Marlene Belfort's book, Mommies, Can Boys Also Be Doctors? A Message to Young Scientists and Other Humans. I can't thank you enough, Marlene, for participating in this. I think it's been really well received. Thank you to the audience. You've been fabulous. I'm so glad we could do this together. Keep in touch, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan and ASBMB, for giving me this opportunity. I've loved it.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.